The Backrooms started as a 4chan post of one image. This sole picture has riddled the internet with theories and meanings behind what is in the Backrooms, which has led to countless games and animations. One of these animators, Kane Pixels, created a series on YouTube that blew up massively, to the point where he was able to make an A24 film about the Backrooms. Before we get into the full scope of criticism, I want to give Backrooms its flowers for all the things it succeeded at before we go into spoilers. This is mostly due to the fact that I feel very mixed about this film. No, this is not going to be a hit piece. I am not fueled by hate or negativity. There are both good and bad things about this film. The visuals are some of the best parts of the film, purely due to the combination of both practical and VFX work. Since it's Kane Pixels, all the scenes where it was purely visual spectacle was incredible. My gripes aren't with the visuals. They were fantastic. Set design was perfect. The backdrops, walls, and ways in which the actual environment interacts with the people was spot on. They are weird rooms that don't make sense, and that's the point. My problems don't lie with the set design. The sound design felt real. The echoes, buzzing, all of it sounded realistic. Shout out to the sound team. Actors on the set, both in the Backrooms and in the other scenes, understood the assignment. Without saying too much currently, the casting and the line delivery was great. Very believable actors, so I don't have a problem with them. Okay, I cannot talk about my criticisms of this movie without spoiling it. It's borderline impossible if you don't understand the plot and the storyline. So here's your spoiler warning. Go see Backrooms in theaters because it's a fun movie if you like the Backrooms as a concept. Alright, now since I've ruined my audience retention because I'm a YouTuber who respects when people want to see a movie without being spoiled, it's now time to set the Backrooms on fire. Backrooms attempts to please everyone's expectations of what the Backrooms is, which is why it falls flat. I was excited, but after the credits rolled, I felt conflicted. This isn't because of personal preference, but rather how Backrooms was written. The film sets something specific up, only leading to nowhere at the end of the film. The film should have ended once the main character's story concluded. Instead, it just keeps going, and the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. It's a really scatterbrained film, and the writers should have narrowed more of it down to one solid narrative focus. You're going to get something from this film, but it's not a fully satisfying experience. After the prologue of setting up the film with about 10 minutes of uninterrupted first-person camcorder footage of a hazmat guy, which I personally loved, we enter Act 1. Act 1 was initially funny and made me love Clark as a character.
Well, ahoy there, mateys! Now, according to me map, we've landed on the crystal shores of a bountiful land, a land filled with great deals. Need bed bumps for the scallywags' quarters? We've got it all, and at prices so low, you'll think that you're robbing me. Come visit Captain Clark's Ottoman Empire, and the only thing you'll be wanting is more space to keep it all.
After some character and world setup such as a therapy session with Mary, and some weird switches on the store's breaker box, he finds the Backrooms later that night in the furniture store basement, and it's genuinely unsettling. No monster, only atmosphere. These were some of the best scenes from the film, just soaking in the yellow light of the abandoned office building. Yes, before he exits, he hears something and gets scared, but we never see it directly. This is what I love about liminal horror. The atmosphere. If you agree, you are in Group A, a person who finds the Backrooms creepy for the reason that being stuck there alone with nobody else is more terrifying than a mysterious entity chasing you. Act 1 is psychological horror in its purest form. Then, he brings his employees into this situation. We see all the reactions to the invisible door and the no clipping. The main character, Clark, is a lot more confident in this section of the film, and I believe that's intentional, to the point where he mentions the pool rooms, which shows that he has gone further than the film shows. There are some great highlights here to this rising action, and it stands out in a positive way. However, Once monsters start dragging our characters into the darkness and we start seeing the corrupted humans, oh, trust me, we'll get there. This is where I started to lose interest. This establishes that yes, there are monsters in the Backrooms, and they like to gather things in piles like clothes, furniture, and body parts. If you like that there are monsters in the Backrooms, you are in Group B. So, we have conflicting ideas in Act 1 alone. Either you are disappointed that this movie is actually a slasher, or that's what you were expecting. The film actually invites a third group of audience members, which is prevalent in Act 2. Act 2 is all about the therapist / psychologist / actual main protagonist of the film, Mary. In retrospect, there are multiple flashbacks to her childhood, plus the movie starts with her, so that makes more sense rather than the main character of Act 1 being Clark. Yes, you could argue that Clark is a protagonist, but as later revealed, he's actually the antagonist. Mary gets a cryptic phone call from Clark, which in retrospect, how did she get a phone call from him if Act 1 kills him? We'll get to that. She goes into the basement of the furniture store, and the sound design of her passing through was super tense. So now, instead of these shaky first-person shots, we go back to soaking in the environment. That is, until she gets cornered next to a painted wall that has words on it. Who painted it? Well, probably the guy who didn't actually die, Clark. Clark is actually alive, but acting really cryptic still. He implies that he himself is the actual monster and then proceeds to kidnap her. This is the exact moment where it's revealed that the main character, Clark, goes from protagonist to antagonist. As a concept, this excited me for the potential of Clark. So, from all the setup, it is implied that Clark has lured both his employees and Mary to the Backrooms to get them killed. Originally, I thought that Clark started intentionally trapping people in the Backrooms with the therapist, but in retrospect, I believe that it actually started with the employees. Clark uses overtime hours to convince his employees to help him with what he calls research, which they follow because they need the money due to their low-income housing situation. In the Backrooms, there's a moment where they used rope to help one of the employees down a steep incline, and Clark ties it a little too tight, leading his employee to fall down the shaft. But in a turn of events, all of them fall down the shaft due to the unstable bed that they tied the rope onto initially to keep him stable. So now, instead of man versus environment as a plot device, it's actually man versus man. This plays into the psychological horror aspect from a human perspective. If you like this concept, you are in Group C. Yes, there is a monster, but the human was the true monster the whole time. Scooby-Doo mystery type beat. Because of this situation we now find ourselves in at this point in the film, I find myself in both Group A and C in terms of the horror that I like. Everyone has their own flavor of horror that they like, and that is what makes horror as a concept so intriguing. I don't like slashers, but I love psychological films where I have to figure it out myself. And there are those elements in this film, but it's mostly a psychological slasher with both entities and humans as the monster. The Backrooms themselves could be classified as an entity in and of itself that lures victims, aka man versus environment, and while you could classify that as the whole point of the film, most of the focus is on what happens inside the Backrooms once you find monsters. Mary then wakes up at a corrupted dinner table where the corrupted humans are there as well as Clark. This scene has so much going on, and it's honestly the most intriguing part of the entire film. It's the height of all of the conflict. By this point, we have already learned that according to the film, the Backrooms is a corrupted version of reality that keeps repeating, but every time it repeats, something is off. This leads to all of the no-clipping of objects and corrupted people. As they constantly say in the film, it's like you explained what a dog is to someone who's never seen one and then ask them to draw one. Corruption plays a heavy role in this film, both symbolically and literally. The humans look distorted. Too many eyes, incorrect on the inside, lack of verbal communication, essentially a shell of what they used to be. Clark is not corrupted physically, but mentally. It's up in the air whether or not Clark is either being possessed in some way by the Backrooms, or more likely, he is in the middle of a manic emotional episode due to the intro of the film establishing that he lost his own house that he paid for to his ex-wife, which boiled some anger and resentment for his wife. Clark corrupts himself with being not just a workaholic, but a literal alcoholic, and it destroys him, which manifests in a literal way later in the film. He is broken, yet this corrupted space feels more like home than reality to Clark. The commentary in the scene is incredibly dense, and I could see a lot of different people taking something away from this specific scene. The effects of our modern work culture, family dynamics, substance abuse, alcoholism, loneliness, resentment, homelessness, depression, just to name a few. I love this part of the film because it says so much while keeping the dialogue narrow, which also gives more context to the characters because the conversation in and of itself is a corrupted version of the intro's therapy session. It's just a darker, more twisted version of it that turns out to be more honest despite the circumstances. In the Backrooms, there is no need to be polite. Honesty wins every time. You know, if I was any other video essayist, I would lie to you and say that's where the movie ends, a true pinnacle of cinema. But it doesn't end. It keeps going, and here is where the film loses me because it discards everything it has set up to this point, and it's just so disappointing. After first discovering the Backrooms, Clark starts luring people like his employees and therapists to the Backrooms. This should have been the entire premise of the film, and it was, until the main character died by the actual monster, a manifestation of his work in the form of a pirate, which mirrors those funny commercials from earlier. Although I understand what they were trying to imply with this entity, after the entity bites Clark, this is where the film should have ended. Right there, cut to black, credits, boom. But instead, Clark says, "She said we don't have to change," and then dies by the monster. Clark as a character was the most interesting part of this entire film, and it should have ended with the concept of accepting to not change as a person instead of trying to better yourself. But instead, after that scene, the film starts going downhill and became a shallow Easter egg hunt like references to The Oldest View and other Kane Pixels short films, rather than a solid conclusion to this film. Mary runs away from the pirate for a good 10 minutes, and I just did not care at all. She eventually runs into lab technicians and hazmat people, and then she is led into a room with a scientist whose actor was in Creep, which is a much better film than this, and he basically says, so we don't actually understand what the Backrooms is, still, subtly implying that they are going to kill Mary after this interview. And then we get a scene of Mary as a corrupted version in the Backrooms, and then credits roll. My main gripe with this film is that it should have ended sooner. Once Clark died, all this setup didn't have a satisfying conclusion, because the film kept going with Mary's escape. Backrooms looked great, but the more you think about this film, the more corrupted it becomes.